The clock read 8:42 a.m. when Helena Ferraz entered the glass hall of the International Institute of Business and Diplomacy, the echo of her heels sounding like a code of authority in the impeccably polished corridors. She was 82 years old, but no one would dare associate the word old age with that upright figure, dressed in an Italian-cut bluish-grey suit, her white hair pinned in a perfectly symmetrical bun, and her eyes always scanning the surroundings with a coldness honed by decades of power. Helena was internationally known as the Iron Lady of Brazilian business. The founder of an export and multinational relations empire, she had single-handedly built a network of influence spanning 3 continents. However, on that particular morning, her face, though concealed beneath layers of makeup and hauteur, betrayed a rare discomfort. "Hasn't he arrived yet?" she asked, without turning her head, to the assistant at her side. "No, ma'am. They said the flight was diverted due to fog. The interpreter is stuck at Guarulhos." She didn't respond. She simply continued walking toward the large meeting room on the top floor, where representatives of a new Japanese pharmaceutical giant's board awaited her. The contract they aimed to close was worth over $300 million over 5 years, and communication between the parties depended, as always, on the company's old sworn translator, a methodical and almost invisible man, like all the cogs she preferred to keep out of sight. In the mirrored elevator, Helena caught a glimpse of herself. She noticed the slight tremor at the corner of her left eye, a nervous microspasm that accompanied her on days of uncertainty. She hated depending on others. She hated even more the feeling that something might slip out of her control. Meanwhile, 3 floors below in a quiet cleaning room, Donna Cachilda was finishing putting away the first shift's cleaning supplies. She wore an ice-colored uniform, worn orthopedic shoes, and lilac rubber gloves. Her grey hair was tied back with a plastic clip, her gaze low, her steps soft. She was a gentle shadow in the marble corridors, someone who, in years of service at the Institute, was barely noticed by others. Cachilda was punctual, discreet, efficient. She spoke little, she observed a lot, and while cleaning windows and collecting forgotten cups, she heard voices, words, negotiations in various languages. She mentally noted what she saw. She had the gift of silence, and the memory of those who have been through more than they can recount. Helena entered the meeting room with her head held high, but the discomfort in her eyes became more visible as the formal greetings progressed. 3 Japanese men and 2 women sat at the oval oak table, opening folders, tablets, and slides. Everyone was waiting for the translator, who had yet to appear. "Can we begin?" ventured the head of the delegation in English. "Of course," said Helena, forcing a smile. But her fluent English was not enough for the level of detail required by the contract, and the cultural nuances of the Japanese language were completely beyond her grasp. She waited, with as much dignity as possible, for the interpreter to show up at any moment. But the minutes ticked by, and no one entered. A subtle tension began to settle in the room. The Japanese exchanged discreet glances, while Helena's assistant sweated silently in the background. Tablets were closed. One of the representatives whispered something in Japanese that made the only woman in the group lower her eyes, embarrassed. It was at that moment that the unthinkable happened. Helena lost control. She tried to start the meeting without the interpreter, stumbling over sentences, mixing up technical terms, apologizing in English, then attempting an arigato that came out shaky, like a displaced fragment of authority. Her eyes narrowed, striving to maintain composure. But it was clear, for the first time in decades, she didn't know what to do. In the corridor, the elevator door opened with a soft whisper. Donna Cachilda appeared with a cleaning cart, heading toward the back wing. A breathless intern crossed her path, running, "Mrs. Ferraz is in a panic. The interpreter hasn't arrived." She said nothing. She simply stopped, took a deep breath, and, after so many years, something within her, an old memory, a forgotten courage, made her turn around. When she knocked discreetly on the meeting room door, everyone turned, perplexed. Helena glared at her with automatic irritation. Now is not the time for cleaning. But Cachilda didn't move. She looked firmly at the old executive and said, with a subtle but clear accent, "Pardon the interruption, Mrs. Ferraz. I speak Japanese. Can I help?" The silence that followed was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. All eyes turned to her as if witnessing a miracle. Helena opened her mouth to say something, perhaps a reprimand, perhaps an automatic refusal, but said nothing. One of the Japanese murmured something. Casilda responded with precision and serenity, bowing her head in the polite gesture of someone who knew the codes. The Japanese woman's eyes lit up in surprise. The eldest representative smiled discreetly and motioned for her to sit. Helena remained still for a moment. Then, as if pulled by something greater than herself, she nodded almost imperceptibly. The meeting resumed, and as Casilda translated with fluency, sensitivity, and mastery, the room transformed. The language flowed like a calm river. She didn't just translate words. She interpreted intentions, adapted expressions, explained contexts. For over an hour, Donna Casilda was a bridge between worlds, an invisible architect of understanding. And for the first time that morning, Helena fell completely silent. She observed, she listened, and gradually the hardness in her face gave way to mute astonishment. At the end, the Japanese stood, smiling and thanking her in their language. One of them shook Helena's hands and said in English, "Congratulations on having such a well-prepared interpreter. It made all the difference." Helena looked at Casilda. For the first time, she truly saw her. The room emptied slowly, and the footsteps of the Japanese executives echoed on the marble as they disappeared down the corridor. The air felt lighter, as if something had been unblocked, as if the rigidity that had frozen the space had melted discreetly under the unexpected warmth of a presence that suddenly had become indispensable. Helena remained silent, still standing, staring at the back of the room. Her assistant approached, but she raised her hand, dismissing any comment. Her eyes fixed on Donna Casilda, who adjusted the hem of her apron with the same tranquility as someone closing a window at the end of the day. "Who are you?" Helena asked at last, without a tone of accusation. It was an almost philosophical question, as if she were addressing not just the woman, but also the mirror of her own existence. Casilda raised her eyes, giving a faint, almost shy smile. "Just a cleaner, ma'am." But there was something in her response that defied the simplicity of the words, a silence laden with history, with everything that had never been said. And Helena, for the first time in years, felt curious. Truly curious. "How did you learn Japanese?" Casilda hesitated, not out of fear, but out of modesty. There were parts of her life she kept like pages of a very old book, opened only to those who truly listen. "I lived in Tokyo for 11 years. My husband was a Brazilian naval engineer. He went to work there in the 80s. I taught Portuguese to Japanese executives. I learned by listening, translating, teaching." Helena swallowed hard. She felt a pang in her chest that came not from surprise, but from the shame of never having noticed. "And why are you here, cleaning the floor?" Casilda lowered her eyes for a moment, then raised them with the serenity of someone who has weathered silent storms. "Because life changes, Mom. He got sick. We came back. I took care of him until the end. Then I needed to work, and no one hires a Japanese teacher over 60 with no recognized diploma, but a cleaner can still be useful." The silence between them stretched, and in that interval something broke inside Helena. It wasn't pity she felt. It was a strange kind of admiration, mixed with the humiliation of realizing how much she had failed to see behind the uniforms and invisible badges. In the days that followed, Casilda's name began to circulate quietly through the corridors of the executive suite. Helena said nothing aloud, but summoned the HR department, requested her full record, demanded details. She discovered that Casilda had worked there for 7 years, without a single absence, without a single complaint, always in the background, always with punctuality and silence. In a private meeting with directors, Helena mentioned, without explanation, that she wanted to form an internal multilingual support unit for diplomatic crises. "Let's start with Japanese," she said curtly, as if it had been her idea all along, and she ordered Casilda to be summoned for a conversation. Casilda arrived at the appointed time, not knowing what to expect. She wore the same uniform as always, but there was a new spark in her eyes, the kind of light that ignites when someone, after a long time in the shadows, feels the warmth of dignity again. Helena received her in her private office, an elegant, silent space where time seemed to move more slowly. There was a painting of cherry blossoms in the background. A coincidence, perhaps, or not. "I need your help," Helena said bluntly. "I want you to train me, not just in the language but in the codes, the gestures, the subtext." Casilda took a few seconds to respond. "Ma'am, is that really necessary?" Helena nodded. After a lifetime of giving orders, she had learned, in a single morning, that knowing how to listen could be more strategic than knowing how to command. And so began an unexpected routine. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, before office hours, Casilda went up to the 10th floor. The meetings were discreet. She brought books, audios, videos, corrected expressions, explained contexts, but more than that, she listened. Helena, little by little, allowed herself to share stories. She spoke of her stern father, the husband who died young, the loneliness of victories no one celebrates with you. "You remind me of my grandmother," Helena said during one of those meetings. She was simple too, but she spoke truths no one else dared to. Casilda smiled. She still called her Mom, but there was a silent intimacy between them, an unspoken pact. What began as an improvisation became a strategy. The multilingual unit was formalized, and Casilda gradually began training other invisible employees, janitors who spoke Russian, kitchen staff who knew Italian, drivers who had lived in Germany, people who, like her, had been pushed to the sidelines for lack of a degree, opportunity, or youth. In 6 months, Helena turned the program into an institutional showcase. "We value the hidden wisdom of our team," she said in interviews. But when she looked at Casilda, she knew there was something deeper, a moral debt she might never be able to repay. At the year-end event, she organized a gathering. She invited diplomats, investors, NGO representatives. She had folders printed with photos of the new program. At the center of the table, a name shone in simple letters: Invisible Voices Project. Casilda was called to the stage, applauded, and at the end she received a gold brooch with the Institute's symbol from Helena's hands. "You changed everything, Donna Casilda," she said into the microphone, "and you taught me that silence sometimes speaks louder than speeches." Casilda bowed her head, moved. Applause filled the room, and Helena, for the first time in many years, stepped down from the stage and walked to the back of the room, where other employees watched from afar. She shook each one's hand, called them by name, one by one. When she returned to the stage, she looked at the audience and said, "Today we don't celebrate just a project. We celebrate a change in perspective." The day after the event, the Institute's corridors were quieter than usual. There was a kind of reverence in the air, not imposed but spontaneous, like walking through a place that had just witnessed something sacred. Employees who once passed by Casilda without noticing now greeted her with a slight nod, some even stopping to say good morning, with a genuine smile. She continued with her uniform, still pushing the same cleaning cart. She didn't ask for a raise or make demands, but there was something different in the way she walked. Her shoulders, once slumped, now stood firm, and her step, though calm, had purpose. In Helena's office, the project's brooch rested on a small soapstone statuette, a symbol she chose to keep close, not as decoration, but as a constant reminder that not everything of value is immediately visible. That morning, the old executive received a letter, handwritten with careful calligraphy. It was from the daughter of one of the new program's translators. It read, "My mother started smiling again. She said she never imagined being recognized for what she knew, only for what she did. Thank you for listening to her." Helena read the letter twice. Then she stored it in a drawer she previously used only for important contracts. That, she realized, was perhaps the most valuable document she had received in years. But it wasn't just within the Institute that the transformation was felt. The story of Casilda and the Invisible Voices project gained attention in reports, television programs, and even an international social business magazine. In one article, Helena was described as the businesswoman who learned to listen with her heart. She smiled as she read it. She knew the true protagonist wasn't her, but she accepted the praise as she accepted, at last, the lesson life had delivered through unexpected paths. One afternoon, close to Christmas, Helena went down to the employee cafeteria, something she had never done. Her mere presence there caused a silent stir, but she didn't seem out of place. She grabbed a coffee, sat at the table where Casilda was finishing a banana. The gesture was simple, and, for that very reason, immense. "I'm thinking of writing a book," Helena said after a sip of coffee. "About what?" Casilda asked, curious. "About what you don't learn in meeting rooms, about what you only understand when you look at those who clean up after everyone else leaves." Casilda laughed, a sincere, light laugh. "It won't sell much, but it'll be worth a lot." Helena nodded. And for the first time, she thought about leaving something beyond mere wealth. She thought about legacy. In the first months 3054 of the following year, the Institute underwent